The console wars, Nathan. Yes. One of the greatest brand conflicts of consumerism was waged in the early 90s.
Do tell.
Before you were born.
Oh no. I didn't know the world existed at that point.
No one was even alive back then.
Not without me.
So the big rivalry back in the early 90s was Nintendo versus Sega. And who eventually won that? Well,
no idea.
One of those companies is still making hardware.
One of them is not.
And growing up, I was a Sega fan. I had a Sega Genesis. I had Sonic games. I had...
Steven, classic Sonic fan.
And, of course, I had Sonic games. Why wouldn't I have Sonic games?
Right.
But I even had NBA Jam, which was the only sports game, as far as I'm concerned, even worth playing.
Like the Bugs Bunny movie? The Looney Tunes movie?
No, you're thinking Space Jam.
Yeah.
NBA Jam was...
Are they related at all?
Have you heard of NFL Blitz?
Yeah.
Think that, but in basketball terms. And only 2-on-2.
Okay.
I had Jurassic Park. I had The Incredible Hulk. I had some pretty decent games for it. But I was growing up and I was a Sega kid. Oh, and I also had a Game Gear that at one point I was playing a lot more than my Game Boy, which was Sega's answer to the Game Boy.
A Game Gear?
Game Gear.
Weird.
It had a color backlit screen.
Was
that was a big deal. It was really big, and the screen was like this big.
Right, go figure.
And it took 6 AA batteries that would last you 2 hours if you were lucky.
Are you serious?
So it was a battery killer.
So it wasn't good. Sounds expensive to play.
I liked it. Well, I had an AC adapter.
So you could hook it up.
I plugged it into the wall, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a portable system. But hey, growing up, I took what I got.
Yeah.
I actually bought that for about $80, $90, I think. But yeah. So what was I saying? Nintendo versus Sega. Why did Nintendo win? A lot of
reasons.
Yes, yeah. That is the question. So I wouldn't say that it boiled down to Mario versus Sonic. I wouldn't say that it even, because for a while there actually
Sonic was winning.
Genesis was winning over Super Nintendo for a long time, but Nintendo just did such a great job with the Super Nintendo. By the way, Super Nintendo, I would say, it's my second favorite Nintendo console of all time.
Oh.
Now, that's not including the Switch, because I haven't had the Switch for like even a year yet. So, Switch can catch up. GameCube's my favorite, by the way.
Wow. Unpopular opinions alert.
Are you being sarcastic?
Yeah. Well,
because a lot of people love the GameCube.
We were just talking about how it didn't sell well.
It didn't sell well, but now that like people have... Now the popular thing to do is be like, the PS2 wasn't even that great. It was like the weakest console of its time. And people go like, oh, GameCube was great. It's like, really? Did you own one?
Are they trying to flip the script?
It's just kind of, it's being contradictory.
Did you
ever
play Marvel Nemesis?
It was
like a Marvel fighting game for the GameCube, dude. I used to play that all the time.
Never heard of it.
Pretty sure that's what it was called. I had to look it up.
There was a game called Gotcha Force that's really cool. If I could ever find that game for a good price, I would totally buy it and sink hundreds of hours into it because it's a really cool game.
Yeah, it's just called Marvel Nemesis. It was really fun. It was like, and I remember playing as Spider-Man. You can like swing around and you just like fight. It's like a fighting game.
I would say Marvel vs. Capcom would be my Marvel fighting game of choice.
Yeah, this one's just Marvel characters though.
Gotcha.
But yeah, anyways.
So some people would argue that the standards for Nintendo were a bit higher than Sega's. And the thing is when I had a Sega Genesis, I didn't have a huge library. I maybe had about 8 games for it all together.
You don't have it anymore?
No. I sold it for a horribly low price, and I wish I hadn't.
Yeah, it's always what happens.
I was trying to save up for the original Sony PlayStation. Yep.
Steven.
I remember how much I got it for, or how much I sold it for. I sold it for, the system only sold for about $12, and I only got like $8 more for my game. So like, all told, I sold the whole thing for $20. It was not a good decision.
You need to like go back in time. No, smack yourself.
I totally should have. Yeah, that was not a good thing, wise choice of mine at all. But that aside, the war between Sega and Nintendo, Sega back before Sony was in the console race, they were the edgier, more they aimed towards the mature audience, and they basically painted Nintendo as, this is the system that you grew up with when you were a child. Now that you've grown up a little bit more, you're ready for edgier experiences.
Wow. Like Resident Evil.
No, although I think Resident Evil eventually came out on the Saturn.
I thought Resident Evil was like one of the earlier PlayStation games.
Yeah, PlayStation. But PlayStation was a generation after Sega Genesis. We're talking 16-bit era.
Oh, you're talking about before they started making consoles. Right.
Before Sony made consoles. Yeah. Before Sony rolled around, Sega was the place to...
You said Sony was
the
edgier one, yeah.
Maybe I need
Pretty sure you did.
Maybe I need... Well, Sony was edgy, but before there was Sony, there was Sega doing that.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what I meant if I didn't make that clear.
Yeah.
So, and I honestly thought that because Sega was doing that, Nintendo wasn't going to win. Like, sure, they would have gamers from ages like 5 to 10 or 5 even to 12. But once kids grew into those teen years and they wanted, they didn't want to play Ronald McDonald games and Super Mario games, they would be looking for something else if they were going to stay in the gaming hobby. So I always thought, there's no way Sega's going anywhere. So I'm about to share a fairly popular opinion on YouTube here. It really all was the result of having way too many hardware options. You had the Sega Genesis, which was launched in 1989. Then you had a CD add-on for it called the Sega CD. By the way, the Genesis, outside of the US, is called the Mega Drive. That name has actually grown on me for
really.
For a
it's
little
called
bit.
the
Mega Drive. I just like the Super versus Mega. It's kind of neat. And that was called instead of the Sega CD, I think it was called the Mega CD. Sega Mega. Anyway, Mega Sega. And that was fine. And they had some okay games on there. Then they came out with the 32X, which was something that plugs directly into the Sega Genesis cartridge slot, and it was like a 32-bit add-on that didn't really have a very good library, and it felt like a very rushed thing. And by the way, if you want to see like a more detailed breakdown of this, that's not going to be here. I would look up on YouTube Gaming Historian Console War, and Norm, the gaming historian, does a really great job of giving all the details. But after
they just made too many like add-ons.
Yeah,
sounds like it's like just make another console.
And by the way, these all had like their own huge power plugs that would. They even released a power strip that had spaced out outlets on it that would allow you to plug in all these huge bricks on there.
They were guilty of this kind of crap before like Xbox started doing it with like the Xbox One, the Xbox One S, the Xbox One X, like all that stuff. It's like just make a new console already, like make a completely next step rather than just all these like tiny upgrades.
One cool thing they actually did make was something that was a little bit bigger and chunkier than a Discman, was called the Sega CDX. And that was like a combination of a Genesis and a Sega CD, but like also a portable CD player.
So did you have any of these things?
I just had the Genesis. That's all I had. Then you had although I did want a 32X, and I'm glad I didn't end up getting that. It's bad. But that came out, and then I want to say not even a year later, the Sega Saturn came out.
Right. That was the whole next console.
Yeah, and that's what competed against the PlayStation and Nintendo 64.
Which they should have called it the Sega Exodus. Let me just say.
Oh, haha.
That was their big mistake.
The Sega Exodus.
Then it would have been like, we're leaving, we're done with making... Wait, was that their last console?
No, that wasn't.
Because
in '99, and this is the console that every so often I thought about actually picking one up because they are really cool. They're tiny. They were to me they were kind of like the Wii before they were the Wii, but like but much cooler. The Sega Dreamcast launched in '99, and it was really neat. But it only came out like I would say, I think it was only 3 or 4 years after the Saturn launched. So people were just at that point they had seen the Sega.
Early.
Well, they had seen the Sega CD, they had seen the 32X, then they saw the Saturn, and they just kept seeing these new systems coming out, and they were like, "You don't support these systems for that long." So by the time the Dreamcast came out, they were like, "Why?" People were like, "Why should I buy that?" Also, it didn't play. Everyone wanted DVDs at the time. Like everyone,
it was a cartridge game.
It was it used. They weren't CDs, but they weren't DVDs either. They called them game disc ROMs or something.
The same size?
Yeah. Still a standard CD or DVD size, but they were its own proprietary format that, by the way, were pretty easy to pirate.
Ooh.
There really wasn't a whole lot of pirate protection.
Oh yeah, the Dreamcast. That's like the silver one where it's like the
it's
lid
like
that comes up.
It's like a
it's like grayish.
It's like a grayish white. It's like an off-white almost.
Why does the controller have a screen on it?
That was the really cool thing. So the controller had an addition. This is, by the way, you know how the Nintendo 64 controller had like a little thing where you can add a rumble pack or you can add a memory card to it. So they kind of took that concept and they made it so that you can add a memory card and plug it directly into the controller, but the memory card itself was called a VMU. I think it was like a virtual memory unit. And when you took it out of the controller, it had a little LCD screen and like little controls, so you can kind of play like a little Game Boy, and you could put like mini games from the Dreamcast game. You could download mini games onto it.
Oh, that's
like
cool.
Sonic. You could raise Chow, those little blue creatures that kind of look like water droplets.
Yeah.
And you could raise them kind of like Tamagotchi style virtual pet raising on that VMU, and then plug them back in, and like they'd give you gifts to use in the real game. Yeah, it was neat because it was basically like you were getting two systems in one. Plus, that saved your games. That was the memory card. So, like, it was a double thing. That was really neat.
You could also. One of these?
I never had a Dreamcast.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So.
Stopped at the Genesis.
Yeah, and then the PlayStation, and a lot of people were hyped for it. A lot of people bought it at launch, and I still remember the launch day, 9/9/99.
Oh, nice. I see.
Yeah, that was
nice
really cool.
Symmetrical.
Same day that Final Fantasy VIII came out for PS1.
So that was like the launch game for it?
It wasn't. It was only on PlayStation.
Wait, is PlayStation not the same as PlayStation 1?
No, I'm talking about Dreamcast. Dreamcast came out 9/9/99.
I thought you just
Final
said...
Fantasy. I didn't say that. No, I did not.
I thought you said PlayStation came out 9/9/99.
I said the game Final Fantasy VIII came out 9/9/99.
I could have sworn that you said.
Rewind the tape.
Yeah, well, the tape will prove all.
If we record it on tape.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think I think this is what really put the nail in the coffin, because they only supported the Dreamcast for 3 years because it stopped selling, and this came out I want to say a full year ahead of the PS2. PS2 came out, you could play DVDs, and you had games that for the most part looked better on it, and everyone was going PS2.
The OG is what I grew up with right there.
I love PS2 is my favorite console, period.
Yeah.
So that's really what killed it. They couldn't compete with Sony. They lost to PS1. They lost to PS2, and that was all due to them basically coming up. They had too many ideas. I want to say the 32X was developed by the American side of Sega, and then the Saturn was developed by the Japan side of Sega, and they, instead of sticking with one thing and supporting that only, they tried to support both, and that's what ended up killing them.
Yeah.
Because the 32X was still like $150, and you needed a Genesis for it to work.
Yeah.
But I kind of like the idea because honestly, I am tired of like. I don't like this whole thing. It's like, oh, hey, you've got a 3DS. Now you have a new 3DS, or you have a PS4. Well, now you have a PS4 Pro, or you have an Xbox One. Now you have an Xbox One X. It's just like, what are people going to remember?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, people don't like those half-step.
No. And that's like what I was talking about earlier. Like, that's exactly what it sounds like they did with the Genesis at the beginning.
Yeah.
How many years was it between Genesis to Saturn?
Well, Genesis launched in 89. Okay. I want to say 32X came out in 94 and Saturn came out in 95. I think that's how it worked. Or it was 93 and 94. The 32X was like only like a year or less than a year before the Saturn came out.
Yeah.
And it was a more capable system. And you had games on CD. It was just
like, why
better.
would you buy that stuff if they're going to come out with a new console right after?
Right.
It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. They had too much going on. But like with Nintendo, they kept things very simple. It was, you had the Nintendo, then you had the Game Boy, then Super Nintendo, then Nintendo 64, then Game Boy Color. Like they had here are our home consoles, here are our handheld.
Right, and they were all spaced apart pretty well.
Yeah.
And yeah.
The
no,
release
like
date,
half.
They supported Game Boy, the original Game Boy, for over 10 years. A lot of people don't talk about that. People will look back at the PS1 and be like, wow, they were releasing PS1 games for over 10 years. They did that for the Game Boy before they did that for PS1.
How long did they support PS2? Because the library for that game, that station is huge.
Also about 10 years.
Yeah. Like, I remember being, like, overwhelmed, like, going to GameStop and being, like, overwhelmed with how many games there were. And also, I remember the PS2 was the first time I learned the difference between Nintendo and Sony. I remember getting the game station, and, like, the only video games I really, like, knew about were, like, Mario and stuff, and I was like, dude, do you have, like, Mario and stuff? And he's like, no, that's Nintendo. And I was like, oh.
What's the difference?
I know, I mean, you know, little, like, 10-year-old me, or, like, 8-year-old me, I had no idea.
That's okay. For the longest time, adults didn't know the difference either. They were just like, everything was Nintendo.
Well, to me, it was just all video games, and video games could be played on video game stations. So I was like, "Where's Mario, man? I want to play that."
Yeah, I have a system. It plays games.
Yeah,
Mario is a game. What's the problem? So yeah, it's no secret why Sega lost to Nintendo. It's kind of it's Nintendo had a more focused, more
just a better strategy. I would say
it was kind of like it's kind of like the classic tortoise and the hare.
Right.
Yeah. Like the hare was like Sega was very very cocky. They just thought, "Hey,
like Sonic."
Yeah.
They went too fast.
The analogy holds up. Mario was very slow and steady, wins the race, and that is actually what did it.
Yeah, so it sounds like it was more like
plus Saturn never had an actual Sonic game.
That's dumb.
Yeah, they released a compilation called Sonic Jam, which was just the Genesis games. Although now that I've been playing Sonic Mania again, a lot of people have described it as like the lost Sega Saturn game because it looks like it could have run.
Which one?
On the Saturn, Sonic Mania.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But it looks more like a Sega Genesis game.
That makes no sense. Your biggest title, you're not going to make that your launch game for the Saturn. That makes no sense.
They mismanaged the Saturn horribly. But here's my thing. You can say that all you like about Sonic Mania and how it's like the lost Saturn game. Like, please don't think that if Sonic Mania came out on the Saturn, like that would have saved Sega somehow. It wouldn't have. I guarantee you, back in the mid-90s, everyone was obsessed with 3D. It had to be in 3D. If you released a 2D game, forget about it. In fact, PS1, I want to say during the first year, I don't think that they released any game that didn't have some kind of at least a 3D element to it. Like if it was strictly in 2D, they wouldn't allow you to release it on their system. So
the N64 came out and the Saturn were around the same time.
64 came out like a year later.
Yeah, so I mean, no, if the Saturn was strictly 2D,
well, Saturn wasn't. But it was stronger at 2D than the PlayStation was.
But it wasn't like it didn't have 3D stuff like what we saw
didn't have
in
Sonic.
like Legend of in Ocarina of Time, and Super Mario 64.
Right. It did. I want to say it had a Resident Evil port. It had like Doom ports and Quake ports, which were popular PC games around the time. But it just it wasn't very strong with those games.
Right.
And again, no Sonic. Like it or not, Sonic sells Sega systems.
Yeah.
Dreamcast had good Sonic games, but not even that could help it.
What was the first Sonic game for Dreamcast?
Sonic Adventure.
Okay, yeah.
Fantastic
game. That's a good one.
So yeah, that's a little history.